Thank you for tuning in this morning for this week's live Q&A. It's beginner beekeeping, and we've also got a new little product here, which is the weather guard. So we're going to show you how to put that on, how to put it together, and talk a little bit about what it does for you. So when you are on this side of the hive, just a word of warning, this is the side of the hive where the bees are actively guarding their entrance. So wear your bee suit, wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping until you really know the temperament of your hive. Now, a bit of smoke is good as well, just to calm the bees as you fit your new weather guard. So the setup is really quite simple, and we'll show you how to do that. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below. It's also beginner beekeeping. The first one we do every month is beginner beekeeping, so it's dedicated to all of those who feel a bit nervous to ask questions. Here's a safe place where you can put your questions out, and we've got a friendly community here to answer your questions so you can get started in this wonderful pursuit of beekeeping. So the weather guard, for those that are just tuning in, is a new thing. Apologies if they're not available. We have had them a very strong take up with them, so we're making them as fast as we can. So have a look and see if they are still available to you. We're stocking them in warehouses near you. We've got warehouses in most major areas. So that is the weather guard. Now let's show you how to put it together. I'm going to add a little bit of smoke here because we're working on the entrance side of the hive. Now we could also harvest a bit of honey while we're doing this. We get a lot of honey coming in this time of year. And just have a little look at this edge frame here, and you'll see that the frame we harvested 2 weeks ago with Matt Stone is now being rebuilt by the bees. They've torn off the capping, they've rebuilt the cells, and if you have a close look, you'll see all of the new nectar they're converting to honey down the cells, which is very exciting to see it really coming in like that. And we'll just fit our little shelf brackets down here and get a harvest happening while we answer your questions, and while we also do a demonstration of how to put together your little weather guard. So stay tuned for that. We're going to use a tall jar just so we can harvest, and that way we don't have to sit here swapping jars while we do the little weather guard how to. If you've got questions, put it in the comments. Trace will read those out as we go. It's fantastic to hear all the comments from all around the world. Also let us know whereabouts in the world are you tuning in from, what the honey's like in your area, and what the season is like as well. It's super interesting to us. And while we harvest, we will be setting up the new weather guard, so stay tuned. All I'm going to do, let's not forget the tube, is insert this little tube in here. I'm choosing a frame, looks nice and full at the back. We have harvested a lot from this hive recently. However, it looks like we've still got a nice full frame here. And all I'm going to do is insert that key and turn it like that. And straight away you can see the honey draining down this cell line here. And that just gets repeated all the way through the comb. And each cell line, we've now made channels for the honey to flow down. So it's my father and I's invention that we brought to the world in 2015, and it's so great to have a global community using this invention and harvesting their own honey directly from the hive without the old process of extracting conventionally, where you had to take all the frames out of the hive and back to a processing setup, which I did for years and years, and that was the inspiration to harvesting honey like this. I thought, why can't we just tap the honey straight out of the hive and let the bees do their thing? And there it is, gorgeous light honey in the springtime here, which is a joy for us. We often get really dark tones, which is amazing as well, but we get a limited amount of this really light honey coloured honey, so we treasure it in the springtime. Look at that, just pouring out. It's nice and warm here today, so the honey's really flowing freely. When it's colder, it might flow slower, but you can be doing other things while it's flowing, so it doesn't really matter. Gorgeous, look at that. Yum. I really do love honey, and what I love even more is all the different types of honey that you can get from a single hive. Different colours, different flavours. Yum, yum. Look at that. Okay. So over here we have our weather guard. Now, it comes in a little box like this, and we're going to open it up and show you just how to put it together and the things you'll need to do to get it ready. So here it is. It comes in black, but you can add your colour scheme as you like by painting it with your standard spray cans of more automotive paint. So you'll need to add your weather seal, which goes along the back here. And that's important because it stops the rain that's running down your hive, running down onto the landing board. So the easy way to do that is you first find your orientation. So it should be like this, with the point towards the top, like that. So that's what we're aiming for, and that way when it presses up against the hive, it'll create that nice water seal, limiting the amount of water that will land on your landing board. So we've found that the easy way to do this is peel back a little bit of this adhesive strip at a time. So I'm just going to peel back that much, lining it up with the edge. There we go. And rather than peel the whole lot at once, we find it's better to just do a little bit at a time, and you're pressing down here, making sure that this is flush with the top. That's it. Keep going. It's quite easy to do, and we just go along like that, pressing it down as we go, and then you have your nice little strip which is going to limit that water flowing down the hive. Press it down firmly like that. Once it's in place, rub it back and forth to make sure the adhesive strip sticks. Now, on the underside, you'll notice we have some plywood. Now, that's simply for the bees to hang on to, and also provides a layer of insulation as well. If this surface gets very hot, it won't be so hot underneath here. And also, the bees can then cling to this like they often like to do when you get a really busy, hot hive. Now, the next thing is to attach your brackets. So first of all, we're going to lay them out like that and find our orientation. Now, we want this keyhole to be on the same side as the rubber sealant strip. And then it simply goes in like this. That's it. And another one at the other end. There we go. So let's just get that orientation again. There we have it, with the keyholes at the rubber strip. Okay. Making sure this is pressed firmly down. And there you have it. You now have your weather guard ready to install. And we'll show you how to do that right now. The idea is you're giving a rain shelter, a snow shelter to your bees, or a sun shelter, so that the landing board stays dry, so it stays free from snow and whatever elements you have. Okay, so add a bit of smoke when you're working with bees at their entrance, because that's the area they are actively guarding. So I'll put this aside for the moment, and perhaps if you come around, jump up in the garden here, we'll show you how to fit this strip to the hive, this weather guard to the hive. Beginner beekeeping, everyone, if you've got questions, put it in the comments below. Today we're showing you how to fit this new weather guard. So it's a pretty simple process. You put it together like this with the keyholes ready to go onto a couple of the screws. Now you can add it up here or you can add it down here, depending on whether you want it nice and low or whether you want it a little higher. It's built so that you can put it on 2 screws. However, we find just the top one is enough. If you've got extreme winds, perhaps use 2 screws. Otherwise, you'll probably find just 1 is enough and makes it easier just to get on and off if you need to take it off. So what we're going to do is put that screw right in the top keyhole here. So we're going over the keyhole, same on the other side, and all we need to then do is press that down. Now we have a beautiful fit, and what you want to see is this rubber strip pressing against the hive, forming a seal, and it should be below the handle. So we've positioned it so the rubber strip will be below the handle on the lower position and above the handle on the upper position. And that's important because you don't want water using the handle and getting through to your landing board. You should see a nice, neat seal along here. And that's it. Your bees will take a little while to get used to it. It's new. You can paint it any color you like, and you might even like to paint every hive you have differently, and that will give the bees a visual reference as to which hive is theirs. Some people like to do that, give visual markers for the bees. That way they get less drift of bees from one hive to the next. Beautiful. We'll show you once more with one we have painted white. So this is simply getting a spray can, and you can choose a color you like, and you might like to choose a color that matches the color scheme of your hive. Again, we've got the wood under here for the bees to cling to, adding a bit of insulation as well in case this surface gets very hot. So this time we have 2 screws to attach it to. So that's optional, but that will give you a firmer fit for more extreme weather conditions. So here we go, over the screws on the far side, over the screws on the near side, and then all we need to do is give that a push down and a beautiful fit, checking that the rubber sealant strip is underneath the handle and press firmly against the hive. And there you go. That's how you set up your new weather guard. Any questions coming in?
Yeah, so just a question on the weather guard. If you've got an entrance reducer, can you have both on your hive?
Yes, we have designed it so you can have your entrance reducer on your hive as well. If you pull this off for a moment, we'll just come up again. There we go. That's what that little notch is about here, and that's so if you have the L screws in place, then they'll slide right past here and your entrance reducer can be in place. Because often people like to use the 2 together. They might like to use this as a snow guard in the cold season, and that's when they also might have an entrance reducer if they're in a country that has, say, the yellow jackets or mice trying to get into the hive. Then both together will be a nice solution.
Fantastic. So, and does the weather guard also protect the bees from the heat as well?
It will limit heat on the landing board. However, what I've noticed about bees is they really don't mind a hot surface to land on. You will find them landing on that when it's very hot in the sun. Conventional beekeeping, growing up, we always used the tin landing boards, which were just a piece of tin. It's going straight out, get very hot in the sun, and the bees would land on them fine, and we never had a letter of complaint from that. However, because of that concern, we have put wood underneath here, so that will obviously be a lot cooler, and a place where the bees can hang right above the landing board like they do. So you can also put it a bit higher if you want more room for the bees to hang under shelter at their landing board. You can then choose the position like this, up above the handle. So that would be the upper position. You'll need to loosen the screws to fix it in place. The next one's up to choose that higher position. And the sealant strip should be above the handle. Any more questions?
Yes, so just another one on the weather guard. A few people just saying how much will they be and when will they ship, and that's if you check the website, it'll tell you whereabouts in the world you are, the price, and also what time of the year they'll be shipping. And if you can't quite work it out, just contact customer support and they'll help you sort it out as well.
Give Trace a ring.
You give me a call when I've finished. Now Tiffany wants to know, Seeds, when you crank the key, the flow key, which you've just done to harvest that honey, how does it not injure the bees working those frames?
Oh, let's have a look at that.
Look at that jar of honey.
Wow, now that is a bumper harvest. Look at that, we're just about to overflow. We might need another jar in this case. So while we were fitting that weather guard, the honey harvested itself with gravity, just allowing it to flow straight out of our flow frames. Now we put a lot of effort into making sure the flow frame parts, when they moved, were unlikely to harm any bees. And we got a whole patent about it, actually, where when we were first making the flow frames, we had the parts meeting each other like this. So when they moved, that was fine, the honey would flow out, and if a bee was stuck in there, then it was still fine. But when they came back, you could find that you could catch a leg or a wing in those moving parts. So what we did is we cut a V shape in the parts, so the bees then have to bridge this area with their own beeswax. So when the parts move and come back again, if you've got bees in the cells, which ideally there isn't bees down the cells because you're harvesting when the honey is capped, but let's say there's an area of the comb that is dry with no honey down it, then, and some bees happen to be down those cells, then the parts move, they come back, and then this bridge of wax is now broken, so there's not the parts directly able to catch the bee's knees. So I can confidently say that this method of harvesting harms a lot less bees than the conventional way, where you're taking the hive apart, brushing all the bees off the comb, you end up with a big sticky mess everywhere. We're just about to overflow this jar, so let's just swap it over. So the whole inspiration was, how can we do this in a way which is more gentle for the bees and a lot easier for us? And here we are, harvesting beautiful honey straight from the hive, without having to open it, without having to tear heaps of comb and squash heaps of bees, which is sort of hard. I mean, if you're really gentle with a small colony, you can get in and get out without squashing any bees, but once you've got a really strong colony producing a lot of honey, it's pretty hard to harvest honey in the conventional way without a lot of squashed bees. And you get used to that as a beekeeper, but ideally we can harvest in a gentle, easy way and leave the bees to be. Look at that, beautiful, beautiful harvest. In fact, we probably can't even close that lid because the jar is too full. And that is a 2 litre jar, so we got just over 2 litres when we fill to the top, which is 3 kilograms of honey right there from a single flow frame. So if we harvested all the frames, then we would have 7 of these jars. It's a beautiful thing, and I love tasting all the different honeys that come in. I mean, honey growing up is something I really revered, I guess, and I loved harvesting from our hives just to taste the honey, and I still do. It's just such a beautiful thing to share and to have as part of your family and so much better for you than refined sugar, because it's full of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients and medicinal properties. Not to mention how the flavour is just so beautiful and different as you go through the different honeys in different hives, different parts of the season and different frames. Keep the questions coming in.
Right. See that now Clinton, he's tuning in saying he's already ordered his weather guard, so thanks Clinton for that. But his question, and it's a bit like what happens to one of my hives actually, Cedar, he says that the bees don't put honey in the rear window cells even when the rest of the frame is full. And I know I've spoken to you about this because I've got a couple of hives frames and they do the same on my hive.
Yes, that seems to be a genetic trait. First of all, if there's a lot of light getting to here, they will not fill the end frames. But when you have the window closed, there shouldn't be enough light for that to be a factor. So we do find, and we don't have any hives here at the moment to show you, but we do find that occasionally you get a hive that for whatever reason doesn't like to fill to the extremities. And that makes it a bit tricky because this is certainly a useful view. You can see that this frame is full of honey and this one isn't. So that gives you a good idea of which frames to harvest. Now we have harvested this one recently, we've harvested this one, but we haven't harvested this one. So it's certainly a useful view. However, you can still get a gauge of when it's time to harvest if you really have a look at what's going on with your hive. Generally they're filling from the center out to the extremities, so the windows on the side are quite useful to see when it's time to harvest. So have a look at this side window here and you'll notice that that frame has a lot of open cells, and down it is nectar glistening, showing that they are currently bringing in nectar and producing honey. So that means they'll be doing that throughout the whole hive, and you might just be able to look down in between the frames and see some of the capping deeper within. If you're unsure, you can of course pop on your bee suit, get out your smoker and pull a frame or two out and have a look at what the windows are telling you compared to what's actually happening inside the hive, and still use these windows to gauge whether it's time to harvest, even when they're not filling the cells at the back. You'll find if your hive changes queens or you change the queen, then you have a different set of genetics, and you might just find they'll then fill the window. But it's not really a reason to change the queen. There's many better reasons to change your queen, like aggression, or perhaps they're not very productive, or perhaps they're too swarmy, and these are all reasons why people change the queen. But just as a matter of discussion, it seems to be a genetic trait on whether the bees will fill to the extremities, and on rare occasions you get ones that won't fill the very last window.
Special bees. Maybe Clinton and I have special bees.
Yes.
Hey, Lynette's pretty excited, just added the Flow Super, and just wondering, does peeking to have a look through the window upset the bees, or do they even notice?
Doesn't seem to. You can have a look there and they're all going about their business pretty calmly. We're harvesting the very next frame next to this one, and they seem in quite normal behaviour. They're not running around wildly or trying to get out the window or anything like that. So I would say the answer, certainly on this hive, is no. It doesn't seem to disturb them opening the windows and having a look.
Fantastic, Cedar. Now, a question is, and it often comes up a little bit on our lives, is that when you're doing harvesting honey, is it affecting the new babies, like the eggs and the cells, and the difference between maybe the brood box and the super, and why it's not affecting the queen or the brood? Or
okay, great question. So whether you're doing conventional beekeeping or you're harvesting with your flow frames, what you don't want is the queen laying in their honey collection area, which is called a honey super. So in this case we have an excluder, which is this black line you see here, separating the brood box, which is where the queen is laying her eggs. The worker bees are looking after the young larvae. There's a lot of brood in the cells and so on. And up here you've got your honey collection box. Now the queen excluder is sized so the queen is too big to get through, but the worker bees can freely come through and use your honey super to store their honey. So that's how we make sure there's no larvae in the flow frames, because you don't want to be moving the cells like this obviously if the bees are raising their young in the flow frames. Occasionally you can get an issue where the queen sneaks through the excluder when she's young and small, and if that happens to you, then you'll need to move her back down into the bottom box, and we've got lots of videos showing you how to do that.
Great. Cedar, Mike was wondering, after pulling the honey from the flow super and then taking the super off for winter, is there anything they need to do to them to store them through winter? Mike's saying some of his frames still have wax on them.
So it'd be quite normal to have a lot of wax on your frames after they've been used by the bees. So generally we just store them in a cold place away from vermin and things like wax moth. The very best thing to do is put them in a deep freeze, and that'll keep them as they are till next time you need them. And you put them back on the hive when it's ready, which is typically in the next season if you're in a very cold climate. If you don't have a deep freeze, then what you'll need to do is after you've harvested your honey, you might like to leave it on the hive for a few more days or a week afterwards so they can clean up all the last drops. Then take the flow frames away if you plan to pack them up for a long cold winter. But if you leave them in a warm area, then fermentation of any nectar that might be in the cells may occur. So you're better off giving them a wash at that point, letting them dry and storing them away. If you haven't done that and you've arrived at the next season with fermented and mouldy honey, then you might like to get out a pressure washer and give them a good clean, let them dry before putting them back in the hive for the next season. People are finding actually after about 5 or 6 or 7 years, it's a good idea to clean a lot of the old wax off. And to do that, you simply take the frames out of the hive, lay them down on a flat surface like concrete or something like that, and get your pressure washer and blast down the cells like that. Set them in the open position to do that and let the water flow out the trough area. And that way you can strip a whole lot of the old wax off and give them a new lease of life. Please don't throw them away even after you've used them for 9 years. We really want to make them last a lifetime. So get in there, give them a good clean up, give them a new lease of life and put them back in the hive again. Focus with your pressure washer on the window side, get it nice and clean. If you feed your pressure washer some hot water from a hot water service, it'll be even better, and you can gain a lot of this beautiful view back that you started with. Because after a while, the wax and propolis really builds up and starts to cloud this beautiful view you get, which is quite useful for watching the bees filling the cells with honey.
Right. Cedar, in our little lumber yard has noticed that there might be a few little ants on our hives on the outside. So just wondering, how do we combat that with the plants touching them? That's probably because I haven't pruned them enough. But also, what do we do to stop the ants from going into the flow hive?
Okay, so ants will not go into a hive that has a lot of bees in it. They will keep the ants out. So ants are only an annoying sort of cosmetic issue for the humans. And they do tend to like to build behind these window covers, the key access cover, and under your roof. So if you want to stop them doing that, then we do have ant guards, which I'll show you what they're like. Now, we haven't got them installed on this hive. If you look down at the legs, there is no ant guard here. The ants are free to walk up onto the hive. And if you look at this hive here, we have the ant guards installed. So the way these work is you've got a cup down the bottom and you've got a lid up the top, and it screws up and allows an area here for you to then put some oil or grease in. You could use a Vaseline, a white grease, you could put that in there, and also underneath there's a little pocket we've made underneath as well, and that will create this nice ant barrier. They will not want to walk across that. If you've got really large ants, leave the lid up higher. If you've got smaller tiny ones like we've got here, then you can really screw that down low, which helps keep the water from washing out your oil or your Vaseline. Now, of course it won't work if you've got foliage touching the hive, because the foliage will be a bridge, so you'll need to give your garden a bit of a prune, make a bit of space around your hive, and then you need to take off the window covers, brush any ants away, take off the roof, brush any ants away. Don't forget behind the key access cover here. Do that a couple of times and the ants will go away till next time. So a little bit of persistence and you can get the ants to disappear. But having said that, they're really only a cosmetic bother and they won't actually bother your bees or honey production.
Now Amy Louise is really excited, just got the Flow Hive 2 Plus has just arrived, and Amy's bought a water-based decking oil, a clear one to waterproof the outside. Just wondering, Cedar, do you recommend using that for the roof as well, or should they be painted with an exterior paint? So the 2 Plus.
We do recommend painting the roof shingles top and bottoms, so all sides of the roof shingles, with an exterior house paint, and that'll give you your best long-lasting seal. Now, having said that, you're welcome to try things and let us know how it goes, and we're always interested with different finishes people are using and the effect it has. And there are there's always new products coming out that we haven't tested that are made for making wood look like wood outdoors. So as you say, those kind of decking products for exterior outdoor wood are the ones to go for if you want to keep a hive looking like natural wood for as long as possible.
Right. Now Della Rose is asking, do you get to try your own honey and how is it, and do you think the flowers matter in terms of the flavour?
Absolutely. So let me try this honey. That is a beautiful fruity honey, and I can taste 2 flavours in there. We've got the privet, which was flowering 3 weeks ago, and prior to that, which is an understory weed here actually, but the bees don't see it as a weed, they see it as a great nectar source. And then we've got the Goya, which is a rainforest species here, also called the wild quince, and it's got a very aromatic, blow your taste buds off kind of flavour, and it's a wonderful one to have in your honey tasting collection just because it's so bright and floral and fruity. But then the next frame might have been filled up during the winter time and you'll get these dark multi-tones that we get here in the heathland. Then we have the macadamias that flower here, which is more of a neutral honey. It's almost like sugar syrup in a way. So that way you can get all the different flavours of your season, and you might decide different flavours go with different things. So cooking with honey is a wonderful thing to do as well, and you'll find that some flavours will go with some things but not others. And I always like to, if I can, save some of those flavours so that when you have friends around you can show them the difference between the different flavours that have come out of your one hive. And I always recommend harvesting single frames to jars, that way you're not mixing up all the flavours of the season into one bucket. You still get good honey doing that, but it's just not as good as having the separate flavours and the story that it tells when you're showing off your honey when people come to visit.
Right. So how come the bees don't sting you? That is a question.
They do sometimes, so I can get very complacent as an experienced beekeeper. I really do recommend wearing your bee suit and your gloves when you're around your hive, especially if you're on the entrance side or starting to take the hive apart. So I've always got my gloves at the ready, and sometimes you'll see me put them on because the bees are getting a little bit defensive and starting to sting me on my hands. For me as an experienced beekeeper, I prefer to get the occasional sting on my hands than I do to wear gloves. So as you go on, you might make those choices, but when you start out and you're still getting used to how a hive behaves and when the bees are agitated and when they're not, wear your gloves, protect yourself, and give yourself a gentle start in beekeeping. So good bee suit. My favourite is the bee jacket, but of course you need to be wearing pants when you are wearing a jacket. And a pair of gloves. My favourite is the mesh because that allows the airflow to flow through and it's just not so hot. We do have our organic cotton suits too if you're in the cooler climates, and these have organic cotton sections on them, and we like to keep it organic for the bees because the bees need a more organic world where flowers are safe to forage on.
Cedar, is the flow hive good for new beginner beekeepers who's never kept bees before?
So we find about half of our global audience of well over 100,000 beekeepers is brand new to beekeeping. Now that was a surprise to us when we started. We started with a boom with orders from 130 different countries at once, and for those that were part of that, thank you very much. We went from my father and I in a shed tinkering away for a decade with this product to suddenly having a global audience with, at the time it was 25,000 orders from 130 different countries, and we set about manufacturing and delivering those, which we actually got most of those to people on time. And half of those were new to beekeeping, so we suddenly realised we needed to develop education material. And we straight away set about making a lot of online content. So you'll see almost 10 years now of videos showing you how to do all things flow hive and beekeeping. And after a while we realised that people actually wanted a dedicated course they could move through. So what we did is we created the beekeeper.org with experts from all over the world contributing to high quality video training material. And we've also made that a fundraiser to raise funds for habitat, for the bees, for projects that help the bees. And we're really happy to say we've been partnering with organisations around the globe now at creating high quality habitat for the bees, and we've planted more than 1.5 million trees now, and the idea is we're creating billions of blossoms for the bees to safely forage on. So we're really big on education. We've got thousands of videos now. We've got a dedicated online course for education, and the idea is if you're new to beekeeping, you can grab that online course that's made to take you from square one, knowing nothing about beekeeping, right through to even a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. So yes, our flow hives are very suitable for beginners. You don't need all of the processing equipment, a dedicated shed for that, or you don't need to clutter up your laundry full of hive supers and components, and the centrifuge, the decapping bench, the decapping knives, the sieving buckets, all of the paraphernalia that you once needed for conventional harvesting. It now happens all right here in the field. You're just harvesting directly from your hive to the jar, and this jar overflowed, so we've actually swapped it over. You get a nice full jar like this out of your hive.
Right.
Keep the questions coming in.
Yeah, look, just want to do a big shout out too to Happy Bubbles 83, who's on Instagram. So do you really encourage our community to answer each other questions, and it looks like Happy Bubbles 83 has been helping answer a lot of questions on Insta, so big shout out to Happy Bubbles.
Thank you for Happy Bubbles and all of those people that jump in and answer questions. It's a great show of humans actually, and how they really love to go out of their way to help each other. And it's just been wonderful over the last 10 years watching that community blossom, watching a community help each other to get started in a wonderful pursuit of beekeeping. And of course we're here each week to answer your questions as well, and we've got a whole lot of training material for you if you look at our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, or our online course at thebeekeeper.org.
Right, now this question's coming in from Alaska, and Battle Phoenix asking, they're wondering how a hive would go in Alaska with the winter season. Battle Phoenix is asking their wife and them are interested in getting one, but thinking, would it work in Alaska?
We can share you a beautiful video. My nephew and Callum, who's holding the camera right now, have travelled up to Alaska to see how beekeeping is done there, and we can show you some beautiful harvests of flow hives in Alaska. Because you're harvesting in the warmer months, even though you've got extreme cold in that area, then when you are harvesting, it is the warmer time of year and you'll still find the honey will flow. There are differences to beekeeping in extreme cold areas, and we've got lots of videos training you how to keep bees and how to overwinter bees and so on, if you have a look at the beekeeper.org. In Alaska, things are done a bit differently. Depends on how you would like to manage your bees, but sometimes in Alaska what they're doing is grabbing their hives and actually moving them to a shed to overwinter them. And there's even services that'll take your colonies and keep them alive over winter for you. So really different to here, where we can just leave it in this configuration all year round. In the extreme cold areas, you'll be doing some things to pack your hive down a bit for winter. You'll be taking some of the boxes off, reducing them to a smaller hive, and potentially in the extreme areas like Alaska, shipping your hives off to be looked after over winter.
Right. So Mary's tuning in from somewhere around here in the Northern Rivers and just saying they harvested a frame a month ago. Did low volume but a divine taste, and it was really thick. Mary was wondering, do you think it was a bit strong on the Manuka flavour actually, and wondering if it was the gorgeous pink Leptospermum that was thick with flowers this winter in the Northern Rivers here?
We have about 80 different species of Leptospermums in Australia. One of those species went to New Zealand a long time ago on birds, and that was the plant they call Manuka. And like the Manuka, many of the species are what's called thixotropic. So as you say, it's very thick. And thixotropic is an interesting property because what happens is the honey sets like jelly, and it's only when it's agitated that it starts to move. If you get a jar of Manuka, or in our case here we call it the jelly bush, you would be tipping your jar upside down once it's been settled for a while and nothing happens. The honey just stays there. And you give it a good stir with the spoon, and all of a sudden it becomes liquid. You tip it up and the honey freely flows. So really interesting property. When you have the Leptospermum honey coming in, which we do here, sometimes you see it comes out like jelly globules, which is really quite interesting. You see glob, glob, glob coming out. In an extreme case where you've got 100% of thixotropic honey, it may not flow at all, in which case you'll need to use other conventional extraction methods to get that honey out, or you can simply leave it in there for the bees. When it's about 50%, we'll find it'll still flow, but it'll come out in globs. Keep that honey because it's likely got some of the Manuka style properties, which are great for wound healing, great for sore throats, and often used as a medicine. So it's been widely accepted now as an extremely good medicine that sometimes will outperform things that antibiotics can't touch. So it gets used in hospitals. It's amazing medicinal properties, and so if you get those properties, then you've likely got some of the Leptospermum's medicinal properties, as you say. There are Leptospermums that don't have medicinal properties as well. Well, there's a bit of a scale here. All raw honey has a level of medicinal, but the Leptospermums, like the Manukas or the jellybush, have a much higher medicinal effect, great for wound care. But there are other reasons, getting back to your question, why you would have thicker honey, and it just depends what the bees are going after. We've had some really thick honey coming in recently, and it was from the privet, which is a weed in this part of the world, and and in fact this honey has some of that in it. I could taste it. It's a beautiful, quite thick honey. When this cools down, we'll be able to tell just how thick it is, and it'll move slower. It'll be thicker in the jar compared to other honeys which might be thinner. So depending on what nectar source they're going for will also change the consistency and the properties of the honey as well.
Cedar, we had a question before about Alaska, and now we've got a question coming in about what weather temperature is best for the flow hive. These people live in Southern California where they can reach summers of up to 110 degrees. Would this weather be fine for beekeeping as well? So we've gone from one extreme to the other.
Bees are such incredible little insects. They have evolved to deal with really extreme temperature fluctuations. So you'll find the European honeybee, Apis mellifera. Here's a lovely drawing to illustrate both the larvae cycle and the different bees. That's an amazing artwork by Sarah there. And they are such incredible species because in extreme hot, in desert environments and so on, you can find Apis mellifera thriving. And on the converse, in extreme cold, like you're up in Alaska where you've got extreme freezing, extreme winds and so on, and you can find Apis mellifera surviving. So the important thing for you to do is to aid them a little bit where you can, but also just appreciate how they are amazing little air conditioners. When it's really hot, as you say, they will forage, collect water, bring it back to the hive, fan those water droplets using evaporative cooling techniques to actually lower the temperature of the hive, because they need to keep their brood nest down here at about our body temperature. And when it gets extremely cold, they'll actually disconnect their wing muscles and vibrate to create warmth. And they'll even station themselves down cells around the brood to keep that brood warm, and they get called heater bees. So you've got this amazing ability to air condition the hive. However, you can assist them by giving them more ventilation in extreme heat and by giving them less ventilation in extreme cold. So we have our tray down the bottom here, and we have the vents at the back. It has the level as well, and you can spin that around to allow ventilation to come into the hive, or you can put the vents down to limit the ventilation, or you can take the tray out altogether to have maximum ventilation coming up through your hive. So if you've got a heat wave in your area, just pull the tray out and you get maximum ventilation, and that will assist your hive in those really hot times. But generally, bees are fine in extreme hot and extreme cold. Amazing species they are.
Cedar, do you need to filter the honey anymore after you've taken it out of the flow hive?
Well, as we were talking about earlier, we have quite a lot of ants, so I wouldn't bother filtering. I'd just let them float to the top and scoop them off. After all, when you've got a whole lot of ants in your honey, it makes it quite medicinal because it's full of little antibodies.
Is that your joke, Ced?
Dad joke. No, just let them float to the top, scoop them off. That's easier than using any kind of filter. But here we are with honey harvested today, and really the only thing we've got is an ant or two, which you can keep out of your hive with the ant guards, and the rest is just perfectly clear, ready for the table. So you can literally harvest honey directly from your hive into the jar and win the prize at the show for the most clear, beautiful and floral tasting honey, which happens regularly.
Great. Cedar, how often would you harvest in a typical season in Central Coast New South Wales?
Central Coast New South Wales, great spot to keep bees, and depending on where you are will determine how many times you'll be able to harvest your flow frames in a season. You'll probably get quite a range. When you're close to the coast, you will get more flowering species during the winter time, and that will extend your season like we have here. So you get a whole lot of species flowering in the winter time. We'll often get a good honey flow right through the winter. And you'll find there will be patches in the season where there's not a whole lot flowering as well. And that will change year to year. But you could say on an average you could harvest all your frames a couple of times in the season. So you'd get something like 14 of these jars from the single hive, which is a lot of honey for a family actually. However, when you have a colony that's a bit weak, you might miss out on that season as it gets back on its feet. So we always recommend having more than one hive, so not only can you use resources from one, so the next hive can raise a new queen and things like that, you also make sure you've got a productive hive producing a lot of honey that you can share with your family and friends.
Right. See, Roxy harvested 4 of the flow frames last week. I'm not sure where Roxy is, but just wondering, when they checked the waste tray, it ended up with quite a bit of honey in it, and Roxy's wondering, did they do anything wrong?
Perhaps, and we'll run through a few things to check, but depending on the way the bees cap the flow frames and even the levels of propolis content in the wax when they do that, can determine whether you get some honey spilling outside of the comb surface as it's harvesting. Now, as a conventional beekeeper for a long time, you'd go and take off a roof. Typically they would have built a lot of comb under the roof. You'd tear that open, you'd get a lot of honey drizzling down, a big mess. The honey would flow down through the hive and out the landing board and so on. And that was normal conventional harvesting for me anyway. So when it came to seeing a little bit of honey spill out the flow frame, sometimes it wasn't of great concern because the bees are very good at cleaning up and fixing up any spilt honey inside a hive. Now, you can choose to put a clean tray in the bottom and collect any honey that spills and make sure you get to use that. Or if your tray is not clean, then you might just be discarding any honey that might spill while harvesting. If you're getting extreme amounts, like your tray is overflowing at the bottom, then something is wrong. Get in contact and we'll work through that with you. Some simple things to look out for is make sure your level's on the side, and we put them in here for that specific reason. We found even very experienced flow hive beekeepers were messing that up. You want that bubble level in the middle, or at least on the entrance side, showing you've got a backwards tilt. That's set up for a 3-degree rear slope when the bubble is in the middle. The one at the rear should be central, like this one is here. And so that's an important thing, because if you have it sloped the other way, you're going to spill a lot of honey inside the hive as you're harvesting. And the other really important tip that we'll show you right now is when you're finished harvesting, the key goes back to a 90, you put it back in the top, put it all the way to the back, and turn the key to a 90 again. As you pack up your jars and things, leave that for a minute or two, because what's happening is the frames are moving back into position. If you do just a quick close, they might bounce back up because of the resistive nature of the wax and propolis. So you might find the cells remain out of line like that. Then you get a whole lot of wax in here to create the cell shape, and I'll often still use it even though the cell's not a hexagon. But you can imagine you go to harvest and you put it like that, you've got this big blob of wax here restricting the flow for next time. So an important thing is to leave that for a minute or two after harvesting to push all the flow frame parts back into position. And also, when you set up your hive for the first time, we actually had someone recently with this situation where they could see there were stripes that the bees had used, and there were stripes that the bees hadn't used because there was areas where the cells were out of line. So that can happen when your flow frames are in transit, the parts can move. So as the setup process, remember to go through every frame, put the key in the top and turn it, and that way you're pushing all the cells into alignment before you start. Otherwise the bees might be trying to complete cells that are wobbly shaped, and again you've got wax built up here that will limit the flow when you go to harvest. So there's lots of troubleshooting to do. If you're spilling a lot of honey, a little bit in the tray isn't unusual. Sometimes you get no spilling of honey at all inside the hive, and sometimes you will. And as long as it's not a deluge of honey overflowing your tray at the bottom, then the bees will go ahead and clean up any spilt honey inside the hive.
Sita, you sort of touched on this a little bit, but Lyle's wondering, just in terms of the weather guard, does it have to go above the entrance reducer, or can you put it over the top of the entrance reducer to keep it close to the entrance?
You can put it over the top, so use your little L screws, and we've actually notched out, you'll see in the weather guard, a little notch here for your L screws. So if your entrance reducer was here, for instance, your L screw would be there, and you could have this positioned nice and low with your entrance reducer in place here. So we've designed it, yes, to be nice and low if you want it to be, or to be nice and high if you want plenty of space for the bees to form their bee beard hanging from the wooden underside here.
That's so good. Didn't know that about the L screw, so thanks for asking that question. Sita, now we've got happy hounds in Ireland and just wanting to start beekeeping next year, and so wondering how would a flow hive cope with ivy honey, as it can be difficult to harvest?
Oh, ivy honey. If you've got experience with ivy honey, then let us know what it is like. So there is honey that is challenging to harvest from flow frames, or challenging to harvest in any way out of cells that the bees make in conventional beekeeping as well. So, and those two types of honey are ones that set, like a thixotropic honey, which we spoke about earlier. We find if we get 50% thixotropic honey, it'll still flow out in globules. If we get 100%, then it won't. It'll set in the frame, and you'll have to use other methods of extraction or leave it in there for the bees. You'll find the agitation of the movement will get the bees to tear out any honey that hasn't flowed out, and hopefully next time you get some nice liquid honey to harvest easily from your hive like we're doing today. The other type of honey is candied honey. So candied honey, all honey will candy eventually, and it's just depends on the levels of sugars in your honey, and different types of sugar will candy sooner than others. So we find around here that our honey stays liquid for a long time, but 6 months down the track we might find this jar will start forming candied crystals. In colder climates you might find that it is forming crystals in the honey much earlier. The honey's not bad, but it is a different texture and a different flavour. It does somehow change the flavour too. My kids love what they call the crispy honey, which has the candy crystals in it. And where Tracy's from, in New Zealand, you find most honeys that they're selling are candied. So they will put special effort into getting a nice fine candy by using a fine candy to set off the honey, and the crystals will propagate through to create a nice smooth candy throughout. Now, that normally doesn't happen inside the hive, and the reason why is because we're beekeeping in stackable boxes with the flow frames directly above the brood nest, which is kept at about body temperature by the bees. However, you might find that an edge frame gets cooler and starts to candy. If you see it cloudy when it's coming out, that's the sugar crystals forming. So if you've got a type of honey, which tune in if you know about ivy honey, if you've got a type of honey that goes candied very easily, then you are best off harvesting often and harvesting as early as you can whenever you see them starting to cap. That way you don't give it a chance to set in the hive. The rapeseed or canola is one of those where beekeepers in a conventional way have a hard time because they take the boxes off and they take them to a processing shed. It might be days later that they're getting around to decapping it. A cold night will set off that candy structure, and then it might be really hard to centrifuge that honey out of the frame in conventional ways. Whereas with the flow hive, you can harvest early while it's still kept warm by the bees, and you'll find that you can get a good canola harvest before the honey actually goes candy at all. So that's one of the benefits of the flow hive, is being able to harvest when you want to easily. As far as ivy honey goes, I don't have specifics about that. Tune in and let us know the properties of ivy honey.
Sita, how far will bees go foraging for plants?
They will forage a very long way, 6 miles, 10 kilometres. So these little bees are busy. Their wings flap at 240 cycles a second. They can fly at just about 40 kilometres an hour, and they will forage 6 miles, 10 kilometres away when they're hungry, and then come all the way back with almost their body weight in nectar and pollen. Almost defies physics that they can do that. And they come back into the hive with that nectar. They'll pass it to a receiver bee, so they will regurgitate it from their honey collection area, which gets called their honey stomach, which is different to their intestine. The receiver bee will then go and put it in the cells, and that same bee will head back out for another run, maybe flying 10 kilometres again that day. So extraordinary when you think about it, especially when you've got a whole lot of wind. And they'll be flying low, trying to avoid the windy areas and so on, but somehow they manage to forage extreme distances when they need to. Mostly they will be foraging within a 3 kilometre or 2 mile radius and bringing all of that nectar back into your hive, and all of the flowers from that surrounding area will be the different honey flavours you'll get in your hive.
Now, why is some honey darker than others?
It just depends on the nectar source. So some flowers must have a slight taint of colour that when it's reduced and reduced shows up in the honey, and you'll get extreme colour variations from almost black, you can't even see through the jar, right through to the light, almost clear honeys. Here we have a fairly light, typical honey colour today. That's the colour that most people would call honey. But typically we get a lot darker ones here, especially in the winter time where they're foraging on the heathland down here towards the coast. They'll be bringing in flowers that have darker coloured nectar, and sometimes you cannot even see through the jar. It might be dark red, or it might be brown colours, or it might be really light colours, and that's one of the wonderful things about beekeeping, is having all the different flavours to try. And luckily the bees will often make more than they need, and we can share some too, like we're doing today.
Sita, do the bees separate the flower nectar by frame on purpose?
I don't think it's necessarily on purpose. It just happens that there'll be a big flowering of something. The bees, while they're filling this frame back up, will be heading for those flowers. Now, today we've got a mixture of both privet and Goya or wild quince, and I can taste those two flavours, but there's likely to be others in there as well. So your honey will be mixtures, unless you're in an area that has a monofloral source, like let's say your hives are out in the farmland where there is a big flowering of canola or rapeseed and nothing else around, then that's the only way you can guarantee that that's 100% that honey. Normally it'll be a little bit of a mixture, but even so you'll get different honeys coming in as the season progresses. We get a few big flowerings here. One is the paperbark, and we can get honey that's, you know, almost 100% paperbark when all of the paperbark flowers down here in the swampland set to bloom when the rain comes in the winter time. And we also get some other big flowerings here as well. The privet is one which we've just mentioned earlier, and we got some almost 100% privet honey when some of the frames we were harvesting a month ago. And the rest of the year we get varying different types of honey. We've got the macadamias in the valley below, we've got all sorts of understory species flowering here in the rainforest below, and we've got all sorts of things that people plant in their gardens as well that the bees can reach from here.
Cedar, can we sell the flow hives painted?
We don't tend to assemble and paint hives. It's a bit prohibitive shipping hives that are painted and assembled because it tends to be quite a big box and quite a big shipping expense. So we have a flat pack for you. Most people enjoy the process of putting the hives together and giving it the paint job of their choice. If you've got the Araucaria wood, then we really recommend giving it an outdoor house paint like this. Why not get out your artistic talents and look at this beautiful job that Bella's done on her hive here, and really give it a flair of your own. If you've got the Western Red Cedar, then we recommend a good outdoor decking coat like this, and this is more than a year now since this deck coat's been on, and it still looks like outdoor wood. That's what the products are made for. So the cedar you can leave completely natural and just let it go grey, or you can put products on to keep it looking like wood for longer. This is a linseed oil which we don't recommend unless you really want to give it a lot of TLC. So every quarter or so you'll be needing to give it a bit of TLC if you choose to go oiled hive. Otherwise you'll find that the oils will tend to feed the mildew and you might be disappointed when it gets mildew on your hive. Not the end of the world. You can scrub it off with some oxygen bleach, or you can sand it off with some sandpaper and give it another coat. But this is an example of what the oil looks like, and you can see here just the mildew starting to creep in. This has been on for a year or so, and we have hit it probably 3 times with the oil already. So it depends how much TLC you want to give your hive. If you just want to give it a couple of coats and leave it for a year or so, then we recommend the deck coats on the cedarwood or the outdoor house paints on the other species. So there's a few tips for painting your hive. Let us know what you've put on your hive, and we're really interested to see people experiment with finishes also and give us the feedback on which ones work well. Today we were showing you the weather guard, which we showed you how to put together here, and we showed you how to put on the sealing strip. So dial back to the start of the video. It's a pretty straightforward process of unboxing it, putting on your sealing strip, putting on your brackets and fitting it to your hive. So we'll just show you once more how to fit it to your hive and what that looks like. We underestimated how popular they would be, so apologies if you're on the waiting list, but in some continents there's still some on the shelf for you if you do want the weather guard to give your bees a bit of shelter from the rain, to give your bees shelter in the snow. And it does work with the entrance reducer as well if you're bunkering your hive down for the winter. We made this because it was a popular request from the colder regions where people really wanted a weather guard or a snow guard on their entrance to stop snow building up on the landing board or to stop the rain beating in. And we've got a sealing strip here, which is an important part of it, which is made to stop the rain from flowing down the hive face and into your entrance area. So all you need to do is choose a spot. You can be low down or you can be higher up. In this case we're going to put it low down by winding up this screw here. You can do both in extreme weather, or you can just do one for easy removal. So all you're doing is fitting this keyhole that you see here over the top of those screws, and that'll be job done. So like that, and then the same on the other side here, lining it up with the keyhole and then pushing it down into position like that, making sure you've got a good seal along the top here. and that sealing rubber strip should be below the handle or above the handle. If it's not in position correctly, the water could use the handle to bypass this strip. So a good little tip there is make sure it's sealed all the way along, and there you have it, your weather guard. That'll work on your hive with the entrance reducer as well. Thank you very much for all your great questions, and sing out if you've got any more. And if you're the type of person that really loves to help, which is great to see, then chime in and help everyone with their beekeeping questions. It's wonderful to see community globally, because it's just a great thing to see everyone helping each other all around the world getting started in this amazing pursuit of beekeeping. Let us know what you'd like to cover next week, and we'll be back with another show and tell.